From hidden to desired, the Virgin Omega and the 5 Alpha Kings gaze. The night was silent, yet it carried a weight heavier than stone. In the farthest edge of the kingdom, where the forest shadows curled like restless spirits, a small cottage sat alone. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, carrying the scent of burning herbs into the cold, still air. Inside, the Omega moved quietly, their hands brushing over a worn wooden table, tracing the intricate carvings left by someone long gone. They had always known they were different. Unlike others in the villages beyond the forest, they carried a strange energy, soft yet undeniably strong. Animals paused when they entered a clearing. Leaves seemed to shift as if whispering secrets, and sometimes, in the deepest hours of night, the wind spoke in voices only they could understand. The Omega had spent years hiding, keeping their powers secret, fearful of what the world might do if it knew. But fate, as it often did, had a way of finding those who tried to remain unseen. A sudden rustle outside made the Omega freeze. The forest was alive with nocturnal sounds, owls calling, branches snapping under the weight of unseen creatures, but this was different. The rustle was deliberate, careful, almost measured, as if someone or something was watching. The Omega's heart beat faster, yet curiosity rooted them to the spot. And then a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Tall, cloaked in darkness that seemed to swallow the moonlight, the stranger's presence was impossible to ignore. Their gaze, sharp and unwavering, locked onto the Omega. Even from a distance, the Omega felt it, not just curiosity, but recognition, as if the stranger had been searching for them for years. "You are not meant to stay hidden," the voice came, low and almost musical, echoing in the cool night air. "They are coming." The Omega swallowed, a lump forming in their throat. Who is coming?" they asked, though part of them already knew the answer. The words felt heavy, laden with prophecy. "The 5, the figure said simply. And with that, they vanished into the forest, leaving the Omega alone with the sudden weight of destiny pressing against their chest. For nights after, the Omega could not sleep. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow suspicious. And then the first sign appeared, an unnatural light streaking across the sky, piercing the darkness like a blade. It was not a star nor a comet, nor any ordinary celestial event. It was a signal, a beacon, and the Omega felt it deep in their bones. By morning they found the first Alpha King at the edge of the forest. He was tall, regal, with a presence that seemed to bend the air around him. His eyes were like storm clouds, dark and endless, full of both danger and longing. He did not speak at first, he only watched, allowing the Omega to meet his gaze. The Omega felt a strange pull, a mixture of fear and fascination, as if some unspoken bond tied them to him. "You carry a power no one has seen for generations," he said finally, his voice low, vibrating with authority. "And I intend to understand it." The Omega stepped back instinctively. I do not know what you mean. I am nothing special." "You lie," he replied simply, stepping closer, though never threatening. "You are everything the world has forgotten, and yet everything it will soon need." For hours they spoke, though neither revealed everything. The Omega sensed that to show their full power too soon might be dangerous, even fatal. And yet, in the presence of the king, a flicker of longing stirred, longing not for the crown he bore, but for the understanding and recognition he offered. By evening, the sky darkened into a violet twilight, and the Omega felt a disturbance in the air. From the horizon, faint silhouettes appeared, riding toward the forest with a steady, purposeful gait. 1, 2, 3. 4 more figures, each emanating a power different from the first, but equally intense. The forest seemed to tremble at their approach. The Omega's heart hammered. They had known the legends of the 5 Alpha Kings, each ruler not only of their kingdom but of ancient mystical powers that were said to rival the gods. To see them in person was more terrifying than they had imagined, and yet a strange thrill ran through their veins. These were not mere strangers. These were forces that could either destroy them or shape their destiny. The kings dismounted near the cottage, their gazes sweeping over the Omega with an intensity that left them breathless. The first king stepped forward, the storm cloud eyes never leaving the Omega's face. The second, taller and broader, had eyes like molten gold, warm yet impossible to read. The third moved with a predator's grace, every step calculated, and his dark eyes flicked with curiosity. The fourth, youngest among them, had silver hair that gleamed like moonlight and eyes that seemed to see directly into the Omega's soul. The fifth lingered behind, shadowed and quiet. His presence felt more than seen, like the whisper of a storm about to break. "You are the one they spoke of," the first king said again, as if confirming a truth that none of them had dared voice. "The one who will change the balance of all our lands." I am nothing. You are far from nothing, the second king said, his voice calm yet commanding. Your power sleeps only because you fear it, but we will awaken it, whether you wish it or not. The Omega's hands trembled. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the night waiting for something to shift. And then, in the stillness, a sudden surge of energy rippled from the Omega, a spark of the hidden magic that had lain dormant for so long. The air crackled, and the leaves trembled. The first king took a step back, startled. The second frowned, intrigued. The third's lips curved in a small, dangerous smile. The fourth's eyes widened in astonishment. And the fifth? He stepped closer, silent, and for a moment, the Omega felt as though their very soul was being measured. "You see?" the first king murmured, almost to himself. "This is no ordinary child. This is destiny." The Omega gasped, suddenly aware of the truth they had tried to deny. They were different. They were powerful. And more than that, they were needed. But need, they realized, came with chains heavier than any they had imagined. For the next hours, the kings circled the cottage, each one watching, studying, testing without words. The Omega felt their gazes pierce through every layer of fear and defense. Some eyes were kind, some harsh, some curious, some indifferent. And yet, in each gaze, the Omega sensed a longing, an unspoken promise that they would not be left alone. As night fell fully, a shadow moved beyond the clearing, unseen by the kings but noticed by the Omega. The warning from before, the cryptic words, returned. They are coming, and your fate is bound to their gaze. The Omega understood now. It was not just the kings who were drawn to them. Something older, darker, was stirring. Something that had watched, waited, and now began to rise. Their heart thudded painfully in their chest. The forest seemed to close in, whispering in languages the Omega could almost comprehend. And the Omega knew, without a doubt, that nothing would ever be the same again. The first king finally stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You will not face this alone," he said, though the words felt more like a declaration than a promise. "But you must learn to trust not only us, but yourself." The Omega nodded slowly, a mixture of fear and awe washing over them. I will try," they whispered. And then from the shadowed edge of the clearing a faint light appeared, cold, spectral, and unnatural. The Omega's stomach twisted with dread. The king's attention shifted immediately, their postures tightening, their powers humming through the air. It was the first sign of the curse, long dormant, now awakening. The Omega's hands trembled again, but this time, not just from fear, it was anticipation. The path they had walked alone for so long had ended. Ahead lay danger, power, and perhaps longing deeper than anything they had ever known. And as the spectral light drew closer, illuminating the forest in pale, haunting tones, the Omega met the first king's gaze once more. Something unspoken passed between them, a mixture of promise, warning, and the knowledge that nothing could turn back time. Somewhere deep in the shadows, the others waited. Their arrival was imminent, and the Omega, hidden for so long, finally realized that the world had been watching, and now it had claimed them. The forest held its breath. The night crackled with unseen energy, and the Omega's heart pulsed with the certainty of what was coming. 5 kings, 1 Omega, and a destiny that would shake the very foundations of the kingdoms. The first step had been taken. The game had begun. The forest was alive with tension. Shadows stretched like fingers over the clearing, and the wind whispered through the trees as if carrying secrets the Omega could almost understand. Since the first king's arrival, the Omega had not slept. Every rustle of leaves, every distant howl, made their heart beat faster. The other 4 kings had arrived by dusk, their forms cutting through the dim light like statues carved from storm and flame. Each one carried a presence that made the air thick with power and desire, though it was not the kind that could be spoken aloud. The second king, whose eyes gleamed like molten gold, circled the Omega slowly, as though measuring them. "Do you understand what you are?" he asked, his voice even but full of weight. "Many try to hide, but none can escape their destiny forever." I do not know," the Omega admitted, their hands clenching the folds of their cloak. "I only know that I am afraid." "Good," said the third king, his dark eyes narrowing like a predator watching its prey. "Fear is the first step toward power. Without it, you cannot survive what is coming." The Omega flinched, but felt a strange thrill under his words. They had lived most of their life in hiding, but now, under the gaze of 5 rulers, something stirred within them, a spark that was both terrifying and intoxicating. The fourth king, with silver hair like moonlight, knelt slightly, studying the Omega's hands. "Your power is not ordinary," he said softly. "It is connected to the old magic, the kind thought lost to this world. That magic chooses its bearer carefully, and it seems to have chosen you." I never asked for it," the Omega whispered. "I only wanted to live in peace." "Peace is a luxury you can no longer have," the first king said, stepping forward, his stormy gaze unwavering. "The world will not wait while you learn. The danger is already here, moving faster than we can anticipate." And indeed, the air was heavy with a presence the Omega had felt since the first light in the sky. The spectral force that had awakened near the forest edge had not moved away. It had lingered, growing stronger, feeding on the tension that now stretched among the kings. Every step the kings took seemed to echo the threat, each of their movements drawing the shadow nearer. "You must trust us," the first king continued, his voice softening though still powerful. "We may be many, and we may clash, but your survival depends on our unity. And soon you will need to choose where your loyalty lies." The Omega swallowed. "I do not know if I can." "You can," the second king said simply. "But you will learn only through trial. Your power will reveal itself, whether you are ready or not." Before the Omega could respond, a sudden ripple of energy burst from their chest, faint but undeniable. The air shimmered, and the leaves trembled. One of the kings, the third, stepped back, eyes widening in both surprise and admiration. "It grows faster than I expected," he murmured. The Omega stumbled, fear and awe mixing inside them. "I did not mean to." "Of course you did not," said the fourth king, placing a hand near theirs, though not touching. "Magic like yours is not controlled by will alone. It is as alive as you are, and it demands attention." The fifth king, silent until now, finally stepped forward. His presence was shadowed, almost intangible, yet the Omega felt a chill as he neared. "The power you hold will decide not only your fate, but the fate of all kingdoms," he said, voice like a distant storm. "And some will desire it for themselves." The words struck the Omega harder than any spell. Their pulse quickened. The thought that those they now depended on could turn against them was almost too much to bear. But even as fear threatened to overwhelm, a strange determination rose within them. If their life and the lives of countless others depended on mastering this power, they would find a way. The kings observed them carefully, as if watching a rare flower bloom in the midst of a storm. The first king stepped closer, reaching for the Omega's hand. "Come with me," he said gently. "We must leave this clearing." You cannot learn under threat." The Omega hesitated but felt the truth in his words. Nodding, they allowed him to lead, the others following in silence. They moved deeper into the forest, where a hidden glade waited, an ancient place of power, protected by enchantments that only the Omega could fully sense. The glade glowed faintly under the moonlight, silver streams of energy dancing across the ground. "This is where you will begin," said the second king, spreading his arms as if presenting a gift. "Here you can feel the magic that connects you to the world." The Omega knelt, letting their fingers brush against the soft earth. A warmth spread through their hands, then their chest, and finally their entire being. It was both comforting and frightening, a reminder that they were no longer just a hidden child in the forest. They were a force, a living conduit of something greater than themselves. The kings watched, each expressing a different emotion: pride, curiosity, caution, fascination, and something darker unspoken in the eyes of the fifth. They had arrived with intentions that were as varied as the colors of the night sky, yet they were united in one thing: the Omega. Hours passed, and the Omega struggled to control the energy within them. Spells of fire and wind, illusions of shadow and light, flickered and vanished as quickly as they appeared. Frustration gnawed at them, yet the kings never scolded. They simply observed, offering guidance when necessary, their presence both a support and a challenge. Finally, exhausted and trembling, the Omega sank to the ground. I cannot," they whispered. "It is too much." "I will never be able to control it." "Perhaps not yet," said the first king, kneeling beside them. "But you will. You must believe in yourself as much as you fear. Power cannot be taken, it must be earned, understood, and embraced." The Omega looked up, their eyes meeting his. For the first time since the kings had arrived, they felt something else. Trust, fragile yet undeniable. "And if I fail?" they asked. The stormy eyes softened. "Then we all fail. And yet, I believe you will not fail." It was then that the first ripple of the curse made itself known. A distant howl, unnatural and hollow, echoed through the forest. The kings stiffened, their bodies radiating tension. The Omega's chest tightened as they felt the dark force approaching, closer, stronger, hungry for their magic. "You must stay close," the first king said. "It is testing us, learning us, and it will not hesitate to strike if it senses weakness." The Omega's heart pounded. Fear, awe, and anticipation warred within them. Yet even as the darkness drew near, something unexpected happened. The kings, despite their rivalries and tensions, formed a silent circle around them. The first king took their hand, the second rested a reassuring hand on their shoulder, the third stayed alert at the edge, the fourth whispered encouragement, and the fifth simply watched, his shadowed gaze unreadable but unwavering. "You are not alone," the second king said softly. "Not now. Not ever, if you choose not to be." And in that moment, the Omega understood something essential. Power was not just in magic, it was in bonds, in trust, in the courage to face forces greater than oneself. Even if fear lingered, even if darkness threatened to overwhelm, they were not hidden anymore. They were seen, desired, not in the way one seeks to possess, but in the way destiny demands attention. The howl grew louder, closer. Trees shook. The ground beneath them trembled. The Omega rose slowly, fear trembling in every step, yet determination lighting their path. Magic surged within them, responding to their heartbeat, their will, their rising courage. "You will face many trials," said the first king, his voice carrying over the wind. "Some you will win, some you will survive, but this is only the beginning. The bonds you form now will be tested in ways you cannot yet imagine." A flash of spectral light erupted near the clearing's edge, pale and cold, like a fragment of the night itself come alive. The Omega's eyes widened. The kings tensed. The forest seemed to shrink, the shadows lengthening unnaturally. And in the midst of it all, the Omega realized the truth. The darkness was not waiting, it was hunting. The Omega's pulse raced, yet for the first time they did not tremble alone. The king's presence, Their strength and focus surrounded them like an invisible fortress. They understood that mastery of their magic, survival of the curse, and the shaping of destiny depended not only on their own courage, but on the fragile, complicated bonds forming between them and the five rulers. One step closer, one heartbeat, one choice. And then the spectral shadow lunged, a force of hunger and malice, its form barely visible in the pale moonlight. The Omega felt a surge of power they had never commanded before. A burst of light that ripped through the darkness, pushing it back, forcing it to recoil. The kings watched in awe. Even the fifth, quiet and shadowed, allowed the smallest hint of surprise to flicker across his expression. The Omega stood, trembling, but victorious. For now. But the forest whispered, the wind moaned, and the Omega knew it was only the first of many battles. The first light of dawn filtered through the ancient forest, casting long silver shadows over the glade. The Omega stood at its center, hands trembling from the surge of magic that had barely repelled the shadow the night before. The air smelled of wet earth and ozone, still thick with lingering traces of the darkness. Around them, the five kings stood in silent vigilance, their gazes sharp, unwavering, each reflecting a different emotion: pride, curiosity, caution, and something deeper, unspoken in the eyes of the fifth. The Omega had slept little, the memories of last night's encounter replaying endlessly. Each shadow, each whisper, had felt alive, and the sudden mastery of their own power had left them both exhilarated and terrified. Now, under the morning light, they realized something unsettling. Power alone would not protect them. They would have to learn trust, loyalty, and the dangerous bonds that tied their destiny to the five kings. The first king, storm cloud eyes dark with thought, stepped forward. "The shadow you faced is only the beginning," he said, his voice calm yet heavy with warning. "It will return, stronger and more cunning. You must prepare, and we must teach you to control what you can barely understand." The Omega nodded, swallowing their fear. I will try," they said, though doubt clawed at their chest. "But how can I master something I do not fully feel or know?" "You will feel it," said the second king, gold eyes gleaming with quiet fire. "It is not just in your hands, it is in your heart. The power will respond to your courage, to your will, and to the connections you form." Connections? The word felt foreign, but it stirred a spark of curiosity. "What do you mean?" The third king, shadowed and sharp-eyed, leaned against a tree. "The magic you hold is not yours alone," he said slowly. "It resonates with those around you. The kings, those who would protect or even challenge you, will affect your strength. Bonds can make you stronger, or they can become chains." The Omega looked at the five faces surrounding them, suddenly aware of the tension that hummed between the rulers themselves. Each was drawn to them in a different way. Each had a claim, whether of protection, pride, rivalry, or something unspoken that neither dared name. It was dizzying, and yet, in some strange way, comforting. The fifth king, quiet as ever, stepped closer, shadows clinging to his form. "And yet," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, "some bonds will test you beyond endurance. Choices will be demanded of you, and not all will honor what you desire. Even among those who claim loyalty, hearts can falter." A chill ran down the Omega's spine. They had never considered that even the kings, powerful, noble, and seemingly unwavering, could betray them. Fear and longing twisted together, and for the first time, they understood that desire was not always simple or safe. The morning passed in instruction. The Omega struggled to focus, practicing control over their energy. Under the guidance of the kings, fire, wind, light, and shadow responded reluctantly to their commands, surging unpredictably. Yet in moments of calm, when the kings offered guidance or encouragement, their power bent shimmered and obeyed. Each king's presence brought a new nuance, a new strength, and sometimes a new doubt. By mid-afternoon, the glade's atmosphere shifted. A whisper of movement came from the tree line. A hint, almost imperceptible, of something returning. The Omega stiffened, hands glowing faintly as instinct drove them to defend themselves. The first king's hand on their shoulder grounded them. "It is not time yet," he said softly. "The shadow tests us, yes, but it will not strike while we are united. Breathe. Focus." The Omega inhaled, feeling the warmth of his hand, the steady presence of the others around them. For the first time, they realized that mastery was not just in control, but in trust. Trust in themselves, and trust in the ones who chose to stand by them. The afternoon faded into evening, and the forest darkened into a rich violet dusk. The Omega had grown stronger, their confidence slowly rising with each practice, each demonstration of control. Yet the lingering shadow was never far. Whispers in the leaves, faint glimmers of movement, reminded them that the darkness was patient, relentless, and hungry. The first king approached as the Omega watched the last of the light fade. "You are ready for a test," he said. "Not just of your power, but of your courage, your judgment, and your heart. This trial will be dangerous, and it will reveal truths about yourself and us that you cannot ignore." The Omega's chest tightened. "A test? What kind of trial?" "You will face the shadow alone," the first king said, his stormy eyes softening. "We will guide you, but you must step into it yourself. Only then can you understand the extent of your strength and the power that lies within your bonds." Fear gnawed at them, sharp and insistent, but the Omega's resolve grew stronger. They had hidden all their life, avoided the world, and yet the shadow had found them anyway. If survival, mastery, and destiny demanded courage, then they would summon it. Night fell fully. The glade shimmered with a pale glow as the Omega stepped toward the edge of the forest, where darkness seemed thicker, almost tangible. The kings followed only so far, forming a protective circle around the threshold, but not crossing it. Their eyes met the Omega's in silent communication, warning, encouragement, and something unspoken that made the Omega's heart race. The shadow waited. Its form was a haze of darkness, shifting and flickering, almost alive. As the Omega drew closer, the energy around them pulsed, recognizing, probing, testing. Fear surged like fire in their chest, but they lifted their hands, letting magic flow. Light burst forward, shimmering and strong, colliding with the shadow. It recoiled. The Omega's pulse raced. The shadow shifted, taking form, humanoid, yet more nightmare than flesh. It moved with unnatural grace, circling them like a predator studying prey. And then it spoke, though not with words, a surge of images, emotions, and whispers flooding the Omega's mind. Loneliness, fear, doubt, desire, pain. The Omega faltered, staggering under the force of it. Memories of years spent hiding, of small kindnesses never returned, of dreams never spoken. They all surfaced, mixed with visions of failure, of the world falling to darkness if they failed. "Focus!" The first king's voice rang in their mind, though he stood back. "Do not let it consume you. Your power is yours, not theirs. Stand." The Omega closed their eyes and took a deep breath. In their mind, they pictured the kings, the second steady and golden, the third fierce and unwavering, the fourth gentle yet strong, the fifth quiet but constant. They felt their presence as a force beyond sight, a tether to reality, to courage. Light surged from their heart, radiating outward, pushing against the darkness. The shadow shrieked, a sound that made the air itself shiver. But the Omega did not yield. They remembered the first king's words. Power is not taken, it is earned, understood, and embraced. The shadow lunged. The Omega braced, feeling their magic bend and twist around it, not just as a weapon but as a shield, a reflection of their own will. And then something extraordinary happened. The shadow froze, almost as if recognizing the Omega not as prey, but as equal. For a moment the forest fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The Omega's pulse slowed, and they realized that mastery was not control alone. It was understanding, empathy, and the courage to face one's own fear, reflected back in the enemy. The shadow dissolved into a pale mist, retreating into the trees, leaving only a whisper. This is not over. Destiny is not yours alone. The Omega collapsed to their knees, exhausted but alive. The kings rushed forward. The first knelt beside them, eyes stormy and filled with something unspoken. "You have done what most cannot," he said softly. "You have faced your fear, not just the shadow, but yourself. That is the true trial." The second placed a steadying hand on their shoulder. "You are stronger than you know," he said. "And yet, strength alone will not guide you. Trust must grow, bonds must hold, and your heart must choose." The third smirked faintly, though not without pride. "You may have survived this time, but the next will be harder. Much harder." The fourth knelt beside them, silver hair brushing the ground. "And you will not face it alone," he said, a gentle warmth in his voice. "We are bound together now, not just by fate, but by choice." The fifth, silent until now, finally stepped closer. His shadowed eyes met the Omega's, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. "The bonds you form will be tested," he said quietly. "Some will fracture, some will endure, but none will remain unchanged." The Omega rose slowly, hands trembling, heart still pounding, yet a small smile broke across their face. They understood finally that the journey ahead was not just about mastering power, but mastering themselves, and understanding the hearts of those who would stand by them. And yet, even in victory, the whisper of the shadow lingered, a reminder that the darkness was patient, cunning, and far from finished. The night was heavier than before, thick with mist and shadow that slithered through the forest like living fingers. The Omega stood at the center of the glade, hands trembling, heart pounding, yet eyes bright with determination. The past days had been a whirlwind of fear, discovery, and wonder. They had faced the shadow once, learned the beginning of their power, and begun to understand the intricate bonds linking them to the five kings. But the trials had only begun. The kings stood around them, each one radiating strength, focus, and unspoken tension. The first king's stormy gaze softened as he approached. "Tonight you face the final test," he said, voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Not of magic alone, but of heart, trust, and choice. Only by standing together can we confront the darkness fully." The Omega swallowed. "I am ready," they whispered, though doubt still whispered in their mind. Could they truly control what had nearly consumed them before? Could they survive the full force of the curse that hunted them? "You will not be alone," said the second king, gold eyes warm. "Our strengths are tied to yours. Trust yourself, and trust us." The third king smirked faintly, shadowed and calculating. "But beware, even trust can be tested. You will need courage beyond what you think you possess." The fourth, silver-haired and gentle, placed a reassuring hand on the Omega's shoulder. "You are more than you know. Your heart is the key, not just your power." The fifth king, silent until now, stepped closer. Shadows seemed to cling to him, but his eyes held something the Omega had not yet seen. Unwavering focus and perhaps the smallest flicker of pride. "Do not underestimate what lies ahead," he said quietly. "And do not underestimate yourself." The forest trembled and the air thickened as a darkness unlike any before emerged. It was no longer a mere shadow. It was alive, enormous, and hungry. The ground shook beneath its approach, the trees bending and groaning as if in fear. The Omega felt a chill in their bones, but also a spark of fierce determination. "We face it together," the first king said, raising his hand. The others followed suit, their presence merging with the Omega's. A ring of light, soft and bright, formed around them, blending with the glade's pale glow. The darkness surged forward like a tidal wave, shrieking with rage and hunger. The Omega lifted their hands, summoning the magic they had begun to master. Fire and wind, light and shadow swirled around them, responding to their heartbeat, their will, their courage. The kings added their power, each contributing a unique force. Golden strength, shadowed agility, gentle guidance, silvered clarity, and storm-like intensity. The combination was unlike anything the darkness had encountered. It shrieked and writhed, testing every bond, every ounce of will. The Omega felt the pressure building. Doubt and fear tried to claw at their mind, whispering that they were not enough, that the kings might turn, that destiny was cruel and relentless. But then they felt something else, a steady presence, a tether of trust from each king. "Focus on us," the first king whispered, stormy eyes locking onto theirs. "Let us be your strength, but do not forget your own." The Omega inhaled deeply. The fear that had gripped them for years began to melt, replaced with something stronger: understanding. Power was not control alone. It was courage, trust, and the willingness to face oneself. They closed their eyes, letting the light within them expand, flowing outward, merging with the king's magic. The darkness surged, a twisting, writhing mass of shadow, feeding on despair and fear. But the Omega's light met it head-on, steady, strong, unwavering. The energy collided in a storm of light and shadow, shaking the ground, bending the trees, illuminating the forest with a brilliance that was almost painful to look at. Then came the moment of truth. The darkness attempted to pierce through the Omega's heart, whispering every fear, every doubt, every insecurity. Loneliness, abandonment, failure, they all rose like waves, threatening to drown them. But the Omega did not falter. They drew upon the bonds that had formed over days of trials, looking to each king in turn. The first king's stormy gaze reminded them of strength tempered with protection. The second king's golden warmth reminded them of hope and courage. The third king's shadowed intensity reminded them of resilience and sharpness of mind. The fourth king's silvered kindness reminded them of empathy and balance. The fifth king's quiet, unwavering focus reminded them of patience and steadfastness. With that, the Omega opened their eyes and a light blazed from their core unlike any before. A pure, radiant energy that did not just repel the darkness but transformed it. The shadow shrieked, twisting, attempting to escape, but the Omega's power reached into it, touching the emptiness with understanding. They did not destroy it. They embraced it, showed it that courage and trust could overcome hunger and fear. The darkness recoiled, dissolving into the forest as whispers of wind, leaving behind only stillness and a faint silver glow. The Omega sank to their knees, trembling, exhausted, yet alive. The kings surrounded them immediately, concern and awe etched into their faces. You did it," the first king said softly, stormy eyes wide. "You faced not just the shadow, but yourself, and you prevailed." The Omega shook, breath heavy. I felt it," they whispered. "I felt everything, the fear, the darkness, but also you, all of you. And I knew I was not alone." The second king stepped forward, hand resting on the Omega's shoulder. "You have grown stronger than any of us expected," he said, his golden eyes warm. "And yet your heart guided the power, not the other way around." The third king smirked faintly. "Not bad, little light," he said. "You survived the first real test. That is no small feat." The fourth king knelt beside the Omega. "The bonds you formed were the key," he said gently. "Trust, courage, and openness. That is what made you whole." The fifth king lingered a moment, shadowed and quiet, then finally spoke. "You have changed," he said softly. "Not just the world, not just us, but yourself. And in doing so, you have begun to change destiny itself." The Omega stood slowly, exhaustion still heavy in their limbs, but a newfound strength glowing in their eyes. The darkness was gone for now, but the lesson remained. Power without trust was nothing. Bonds could strengthen, guide, and protect, but they required courage, patience, and the willingness to open the heart. The kings gathered around, forming a circle once more. For a long moment none spoke. The forest was still, save for the gentle rustle of leaves and the faint shimmer of magic in the glade. Then the first king stepped closer, voice soft but resolute. "You are no longer hidden," he said. "You are desired, not for what you can do alone, but for who you are and the bonds you have formed. This is the power of unity, courage, and heart. You have embraced it, and in doing so, you have become more than you imagined. The Omega looked around at the five faces, each different, each complex, each filled with admiration, caution, and unspoken feeling. For the first time in their life, they felt fully seen, fully acknowledged, fully part of something greater. A gentle wind stirred, carrying whispers of the shadow, distant but no longer threatening. The curse had been challenged, the power balanced, and destiny reshaped. But the Omega knew that the journey was ongoing. Darkness would always exist, trials would always arise, and the bonds they had formed would be tested again. And yet, for the first time, the Omega smiled without fear. They had faced themselves, faced the shadow, and discovered the truth of who they were. No longer hidden, no longer uncertain. Desired not for the power they held alone, but for the courage, heart, and bonds that defined them. The kings bowed slightly, some formally, some with quiet pride, and the Omega felt a surge of gratitude that went beyond words. This was not the end. It was the beginning of a life intertwined with destiny, courage, and the strength of five who had chosen to stand with them. The forest exhaled, leaves shimmering in the pale moonlight. The Omega took a deep breath, feeling the magic within them calm, steady, and bright. And as they looked to the five kings, each gaze met theirs with recognition, promise, and a bond that would endure trials, challenges, and time itself. Together, they had faced darkness. Together, they had survived. Together, they would shape what was to come. The Omega, once hidden, now stood at the heart of destiny, powerful, beloved, and fully alive.